Следующее видео, которое посмотрим, это длинное видео, что мне в начале стрима задонатили. Видео называется How to maybe criticize Israel. Some more news. Я так и не понял, тогда мы смотрели этого чувака, то ли он левый, то ли правый, по-моему, вроде бы левый. Ну вот нам задонатили полностью этот выпуск, это по сути как новости у него, типа новостной блог. Ну давайте заценим, что он там нам будет рассказывать интересного. Ой, да, маленькие сборы не хочу на экран. На экран обычно увожу большие сборы. Тут всего лишь на 18 минут, на 19, и там это в 6 закинули. Я думаю, что если что, в процессе уже дособираем. Слово и банворд. Ну вот мне кто-то говорит, что банворд, кто-то не банворд, блядь.
Hey! So we've got about 20 minutes. Let's solve Israel-Palestine! The conflict between Israel and Palestine is a multifaceted issue. After World War II, Jewish people were understandably looking for a homeland in the wake of centuries of persecution.
Че, разбираться, если критикует Израиль, значит антисемит и нацист. База, согласен.
Culminating in the Holocaust. And while this is true, what is often overlooked is that Israel wasn't formed in response to the Holocaust. Its beginnings were in the late 1800s, and in fact, Christian Zionism specifically...
Тут, короче, подводка про сионизм, ну окей.
Regarding Israel and Jerusalem preceded the Jewish movement. Israeli historian Anita Shapiro...
Пишут, Каша его юзает спокойно. Ну окей, если он даже юзает, у него большой канал.
Writes, the idea of the Jews returning to their ancient homeland as the first step to world redemption...
У меня даже видео было про разные попытки основания государства еврейского.
Seems to have originated among a specific group of evangelical English Protestants that flourished in England in the 1840s. They passed this notion onto Jewish circles. This concept of Christian Zionism remains strong in the 20th century. In 1917, British General Edmund Allenby conquered Jerusalem from the Ottomans. Newspapers at the time hailed this victory. They titled General Allenby Richard the Lion-Hearted and praised him for saving the Holy Land from the infidels. They even called it the Last Crusade. Because
Стас, не знаю, как Стас. Ну, Стас, наверное, по методичке топит за Палестину, скорее всего.
The Crusades were good. Anyways, in the early 1900s, Zionism became popular amongst Jews due to the horrific pogroms in Russia. It was also widely supported amongst Christians who believe in the literal translation of the Bible that declared after Jerusalem is saved from the infidels,
вообще антисемитизм имеет корни именно из христианства.
That God will return the Holy Land to the chosen people, the Jews. This will eventually herald the apocalypse, yada yada yada. Christians will be raptured and spend eternity in heaven listening to Kid Rock. If that's not a second coming, I don't know what is. So, Christians wanted Jews to settle in the Holy Land because of biblical prophecies, and Jews wanted to settle in the Holy Land because they were sick and tired of being persecuted.
Спасибо большое за донат.
Вне очереди.
Спасибо большое, Гиркин фон дер Стрелков. Спасибо большое, это после этого уже видео запустим. Это длинное видео.
The only problem was that there were already people living there, the Palestinian Arabs. They considered Zionism to be a threat, which came to a head in 1918 after the Mandate for Palestine, a League of Nations mandate in which Britain assumed control and established borders, using the old British tradition of splitting territory by tying a pen to the tail of an excited badger and letting her rip. Palestinian Arabs were also alarmed by the Balfour Declaration.
Ну, как будто бы у них до этого была государственность, он так говорит, блядь, все эти земли были под османами, все.
A statement by the British government in 1917 which supported creating a national home for the Jews in Palestine. Also, the Hebrew labor movement solidified their fears, which was a campaign to hire Jewish workers over Arab labor, excluding the native Arab population from economic activity. As you can see, the history of Israel and Palestine has always been fraught. You have the Jewish population who understandably wanted to set up a territory for themselves to evade persecution. Then you had the Zionist Christian British colonialist interests who had little interest in being conscientious and humanitarian. And importantly, you had the Arab Palestinians who understandably saw Zionist settlement and forced economic isolation as a threat to their livelihoods. This history...
Германия, Да, чё Германия сказал. Великобритания потом даже ограничила, наоборот, миграцию евреев, кстати, в Палестину уже в 30-е годы, и это потом уже критиковалось как раз, ну, по результату Второй мировой, Холокоста и так далее. Понятно, что если бы Британия вела более френдли политику, скажем так, насчет миграции евреев, то, вероятно, большее количество смогло спастись и осесть бы в Палестине. Потому, ну, я не знаю, скажет ли он про это или нет.
Is important in understanding some of the bizarre U.S. politics surrounding Israel and Palestine. In a new segment we like to call
США, как они оказались в то время.
Don't look in the YouTube comments section, folks. This is gonna be a rough one. So, let's talk about the semi-recent controversy surrounding Ilhan Omar's
Он что, перескакивает с темы на тему, не договаривает. Ну, манипуляции, конечно, да.
tweets. Ilhan Omar once tweeted in 2012, Israel has hypnotized the world, and more recently, in reference to why the GOP is threatening to punish those in Congress who criticize Israel.
Что был период запрета, слабо релевантно. Не, но он подводил к тому, что, мол, вот колонисты, британцы там и все такое завозили, перезавозили. В принципе, такая тема часто поднимается левыми.
Wrote, "It's about the Benjamins, baby," followed by a musical note emoji. And the accusation is that Omar is making reference to the anti-Semitic tropes of Jews being manipulative and using money to control
Нет, первые али еще были во времена османов, по-моему.
Politics. But this accusation brings up a larger question of whether you can criticize Israel and pro-Israel lobbying groups without being anti-Semitic. With her all about the Benjamins...
Там еще несколько волн. Вот. Первая алия вообще в 1882, вторая 1904 как раз погромы были. И вот только третья алия, это когда уже было под контролем Британии. И вот пятая она была, но она потом была как раз британским правительством и свернута, по сути.
Baby tweet. Ilhan Omar was, if you believe her statements explaining her tweet, criticizing pro-Israel lobbying groups, not Jews as a whole. And the whole point of a lobbying group is to use money to influence politics. So it's hard to say if this is actually intentional anti-Semitism.
Не, ну понятное дело, что в британском мандате больше приехало, но там было обусловлено как раз политической конъюнктурой во многом. Хотя я не знаю там по количеству, сейчас фиг его знает. Наверное, больше всего переехало как раз сразу после Первой мировой, я так понимаю. Но там просто проблема была в Европе в целом с правами евреев, с правами фашистскими режимами. Не только нацистские, кстати, а и другие тоже не сильно хорошо относились к евреям.
And in terms of the Israel has hypnotized the world tweet, the language could be interpreted as playing into Jewish puppet master tropes. But it's also the same language we use to criticize governments all the time. Terms like hypnotized, mesmerized, puppeteered, or manipulated have been used to describe various governments and administrations, so it's not a term that's exclusively used as a dog whistle. But given the history of Jewish people being stereotyped as being manipulative, it'd be more sensitive to use other language, something she's admitted to. So, could she have worded it better? Yes, absolutely. Is she secretly anti-Semitic? We can't read her mind, and know, but she's explicitly said she was referring to Israel and AIPAC, not Jews as a whole, despite very honest people claiming she said, quote, "the Jews hypnotized the world," which she has not said. You absolute fucking liars. And she's spoken to Jewish community leaders, apologized for her statements, saying, "Anti-Semitism is real, and I am grateful for Jewish allies and colleagues who are educating me on the painful history of anti-Semitic tropes. My intention is never to offend my constituents or Jewish Americans as a whole." But, you know, maybe...
Ну да, не совсем. Это антисемитизм, но не совсем.
This is all just disingenuous backpedaling in reaction to the flack she's getting. If only we had a video recording clearly stating her opinions about the Jewish community in Israel from before the controversy. Holy shit, that was quick. Apparently, in February of 2017, when we still used videotapes, she spoke out about a bill that would ban Minnesota from contracting with vendors participating in BDS, Boycott, Divest, Sanction, that boycotts companies that profit from occupied territories. She praised the bill's stated purpose to combat anti-Jewish discrimination, but opposed the part of the bill that would ban vendors participating in BDS, saying it was their right to participate in the protest. Quote, I certainly never advocate for any type of discrimination. I never will, but what I do advocate for is for all of us to work towards furthering peace in the world. And I do believe that you never get to having peace without justice. We know, and I'm certainly saddened by the rise of anti-Semitism, and I have been part of a community that has been raising funds to support the Jewish community in this time of need. Because as my community is struggling with the particular ban that the president wants to put on us, the Jewish community has been side by side, fighting with us, making sure that we have the resources that we need. Because I think there is a particular connection and brotherhood and sisterhood that Muslims and Jews have. One that is fundamentally based in our shared space and history, our shared land, and one that we will never forget. But what governments do, and what is based in systems, are very different. Due to Ilhan Omar's statements like this, and the fact that Jewish Americans have become increasingly critical of Israel, there are many Jewish groups that support Ilhan Omar, such as Jewish Voice for Peace, If Not Now, and Jews for Racial and Economic Justice. Jewish activist and member of Jews of Color and the Sephardi Mizrahi Caucus, Rebecca Pierce, said, if our definition of anti-Semitism is reduced to, are you criticizing Israel, you have no ability to grapple with someone like Richard Spencer.
Ну, это уже тонкая грань. Там, ну, это, в принципе, опять же, левые тоже. Ой, не-не-не, мы же там критикуем Израиль, но мы не антисемиты. Но когда заходит речь о каких-то уличных пизделках, то может доставаться всем. Ну, ладно, это уже мелочь.
This is a particularly significant statement, given that Richard Spencer is actually a vocal supporter of Israel. Do we have a clip of Richard Spencer?
Become kind of a symbol?
That's right. The white supremacist with a haircut known as the greased-up possum calls himself a white Zionist, praising Israel's white ethno-state model. He's especially fond of Netanyahu's nation-state law that officially defines Israel as a Jewish state and reserves the right to self-determination exclusively for Jewish people, a move that has upset Israel's 21% Arab population and other...
Не, ну там во Франции были еще, что евреям просто на двери там рисовали, помните, знаки не так давно, как бы не разбираясь, сторонники они Израиля или нет, просто по принципу еврейского происхождения, потому там тонкая грань, скажем так. Тонкая грань как раз до антисемитизма очень дотягивается, честно говоря. Особенно у радикальных левых. Они уже, конечно, в антисемитскую движуху вписались так уже нормально давно.
Spencer has said this move has showed a path for Europeans and that he wants a similar nation exclusively for whites, saying, I want us to have a secure homeland for us and ourselves. Just...
непонятно, коренные, не коренные европейцы, но так или иначе.
Like you want a secure homeland in Israel. So does this mean that Richard Spencer isn't a reprehensible anti-Semite who probably smells like chicken grease and wet wipes? No. He is still one of those things, saying Jews are vastly overrepresented.
Лукашенко помиловал немцев, кстати, срочная новость. Но, кстати, мне тоже казалось, что он помилует чисто так. Для задобрения как раз западных стран или типа того.
In what you could
такая игра, наверное, для выхода, для контактов.
Call the establishment, and that they're responsible for the fact that white people are being dispossessed from this country. Cool. Do we have that clip of...
Become kind of a symbol?
Yeah, that's the stuff right there. So some white supremacists support Israel, but it's honestly not fair to use guilt by association. They're a bunch of lunatics whose rantings and ravings deserve as much attention as a negative review scrawled in feces in the bathroom of a Denny's. It's important to note that just as supporters of Israel can be anti-Semitic, critics of Israel are not necessarily anti-Semitic. 2013 Pew study found that...
Нет, это понятно, что если вы критикуете Израиль, вы автоматом не становитесь антисемитом, просто риторика последних лет смещается, конечно, вот прямо в такую сторону.
48% of Jewish Americans polled did not think Israel was trying to make peace with Palestine. Of course, some might try to erase Jewish critics of Israel by calling them self-hating Jews, a term which the Jewish...
Да, ну среди правых альтраитов там тоже есть, там есть и которые Талибан поддерживают, там тоже много разных людей есть, просто не так массово. Все-таки среди левых это, наверное, мейнстримная тема, что они Палестину поддерживают. Среди таких правых консерваторов, наверное, более мейнстримно, что не Израиль поддерживают, хотя тут, наверное, зависит тоже от страны все-таки.
person who wrote this episode would like me to say is, quote, actually pretty anti-Semitic. Also, I do hate myself, but it has nothing to do with being Jewish. It's because I stole this joke from Curb Your Enthusiasm. Why are many American Jews and others in opposition to Israel's policies? According to Jewish Voice for Peace, there are humanitarian issues such as the over 250 Palestinian civilian protesters, 41 of whom were children, killed by Israeli forces during the Great March of Return, a mostly unarmed peaceful protest. There's also the charge that Gaza is an open-air prison where the Palestinian inhabitants are denied basic necessities such as medication and water that isn't 98% undrinkable, as well as being denied the same rights as Israeli citizens. There are claims that the reason Israel must fire on protesters...
Пишет, Нидерланд самые провоки. Не, ну это уже именно какие-то альтрайты, Гитлер-Югент и там и все такое, да. Не, нацисты, понятно, что они против Израиля. Как бы, тут все очевидно, просто таких... Ну, это супер маргинальное меньшинство, скорее. Ну, хотя и ультралевые тоже, в принципе, там, их тоже не так много. Просто они видны группы, скажем так, особенно в плане какой-то уличной активности.
Bomb Gaza and cut off supplies is due to the actions of Hamas. Hamas is a violent, militant, fundamentalist group that has had de facto authority over Gaza since 2007. Hamas is responsible for firing rockets at Israel and has killed 27 Israeli civilians between 2004 and 2014. One of the reasons the casualty rate is so low is due to Israel's massive amount of bomb shelters, the Iron Dome, an air defense system that blows up rockets aimed at Israel. It's important to note that while Hamas has fired thousands of rockets at Israel since 2001, a March 2013 public opinion poll found that the majority of Palestinian civilians do not support the attacks. Only 38%
Ну да, и чё?
accept their use, and over 80% support non-violent protest. So while Hamas's violent actions can't be excused, there's a clear
Ну, Хамас контролирует территорию. В этом-то и проблема. В этом-то и проблема.
mismatch in the power of Hamas's forces and Israel's forces. The Israeli human rights group B'Tselem has been tracking deaths due to the Israel-Palestine conflict and has found that 23 out of 24 conflict deaths have been Palestinian. This isn't to discount Israeli...
Нет, то, что Израиль смог обеспечить себе защиту своим гражданам лучше, чем Палестина, это как бы ничего не доказывает, по большому счету.
Casualties. Every death is a tragedy, but the power imbalance is very clear, and it demonstrates how you can think...
Корчинский, я даже не знаю, кстати, насчет Корчинского, не знаю.
Hamas is a group of dick-swinging assholes.
Возможно, против, я даже подозреваю. Вряд ли он за Палестину топит, но за Израиль тоже, наверное, не сильно.
Still condemn Israel's aggressive military actions towards Palestine, especially when the IDF attacks peaceful protesters. And this isn't just a humanitarian concern, it's practical as well. It seems that support for Hamas only increases following violent conflicts. A 2014 poll conducted by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research found that support for Hamas's leader spiked from 53% to 62%.
Ну, понятно, что это в этом проблема такая, в этом проблема вот этого вечного противостояния, что оно только порождает взаимную ненависть постоянно, и она растет, и следующие поколения там уже там, буквально идут мстить там, за родителей, и вот эта бесконечная цепочка насилия. В принципе, как раз на примере Израиля и Палестины это происходит вот в каком-то таком формате. И как разорвать этот порочный круг, тоже и не ясно.
Following a massive Israeli
Это само собой.
military operation and 50-day war that left thousands of Palestinians and dozens of Israelis dead. Before this, in 2008, support for Hamas had actually started to decline. This seems to indicate that aggressive military operations undermine more peaceful grassroots movements in Palestine and only strengthens Hamas's hold on Gaza. It's weird that like people would support the people seemingly protecting them from death via other people. So maybe we shouldn't encourage brash, drastic policies that only exacerbate an already volatile situation. And sadly, now is the part of the episode where we have to talk about President. Yeah! You see, the Trump administration is using claims of anti-Semitism to try to suppress criticism of their far-right-wing Israel policy.
Under my administration, the unbreakable alliance between the United States and Israel has never been stronger. So before I signed the presidential proclamation recognizing Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, I'd like to ask Prime Minister Netanyahu to say a few words.
So, what is Golan Heights? Is it a biopic of a guy named Golan who tries to win the Olympic high jump? No, of course not, you fucking idiot! It's actually this occupied territory between Syria and Israel. Here's a brief, overly simplified history lesson. Golan Heights was militarily seized by Israel in 1967 during the Six-Day War with Syria. In 1981, Israel passed the
Почему Сирия, непонятно, ну ладно. Там сразу со всеми.
Golan Heights Law, effectively annexing
Ну, они аннексированы, да. Но их они не признаются. Ну,
the territory.
только Трамп.
The problem, this was not done in accordance with international law. The UN...
Вон эту тему каждый год, по-моему, в ООН выходит резолюция, где они призывают Израиль, типа, освободить голландские высоты и другие оккупированные территории и так далее. Не, ну, Трамп вообще мега произраильский.
still considers it Syrian territory and
Ну да.
declares the Golan
Да и
Heights
все признают. Никто за Израилем не признает, наверное.
law null and void and without international legal effect. Trump's unilateral move in recognizing Golan Heights as
Ну, кроме Трампа и Соединенных Штатов, получается.
belonging to Israel flies in the face of the UN resolution and international law. Although this is mostly a symbolic gesture, it does have very real and serious implications.
Бля, при Байдене, кстати, эту хуйню не отменили? По-моему, нет. Там же он и Иерусалим признал столицей тоже. При Байдене не откатили. Ну, в принципе, демократы тоже произраильские, как бы.
Undermines the validity of international law.
А не знаю, кроме Соединенных Штатов, кто-то голландский еще признает или нет?
A potentially dangerous precedent. It also tanks any peace deals between Palestine and Israel. Instead, the U.S. declaring that the Golan Heights belongs to Israel shows Palestinians that the U.S. is not acting in good faith and will unilaterally and unconditionally support Israel. As you can imagine, I totally support the other side no matter what they do is not the best position for a broker of peace to take. If anything, this move only increases tensions between Israel and Palestine, gives propaganda to Hamas, and emboldens Netanyahu and the far-right-wing Israeli government to allow more aggressive settlements, or even to annex part of the West Bank, something he literally said he would do, a move that would at least create more conflict and death, if not an outright war. Wait! The U.S. carelessly does things that could end up sparking civil war in the Middle East? Wowee! And holy heckaroo! So, Trump's decision is, at best, highly risky, and at worst, a cynical political calculation to rile up his base and bolster support for Netanyahu. It could also be an attempt to turn Israel into a partisan issue, which it actually hasn't been. Mainstream Democrats and Republicans have both supported Israel, either unconditionally or with...
Не, он там по-разному, да, просто. Разные администрации по-разному к Израилю относятся. Там были и проблемы с поставками, и с осуждениями как раз. Вот Обама как раз более сдержанно к Израилю относился. По-моему, даже лично осуждал поселения израильские в Западном берегу. Потому там отношения были более сложные. Хотя все равно там, к примеру, поставки вооружений, ну, которые постоянно, они так-то и шли при Обаме.
With soft conditions, neither party really imposes any consequences should Israel continue with settlements or shoot unarmed protesters, although Democrats have started to critique Israel on these issues. The new emerging left...
Ну, демократы там левое крыло, да, оно как раз пропалестинское сейчас очень сильно.
Including Ilhan Omar, is becoming even more critical, and Americans in general have also seen a shift in attitude. In 2015, 47% of Americans described Israel as an ally. In 2019, that number dropped to 37%. And in 2018...
Но все равно там были вот опросы по support, и все равно, по-моему, большое количество людей поддерживали именно Израиль.
38% of liberal Democrats sympathized more with Palestinians than with Israel. So, in order to both quash dissent on Israel and to attack the left, moderate Democrats and Republicans, who have always used claims of anti-Semitism to attack sympathy towards Palestinians, have gone from subliminal to liminal to superliminal.
Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism.
Superliminal?
I'll show you. Hey, you! Join the Navy! Yeah, all right.
I'm in.
It's not just the right that employs the tactic of equating criticism of Israel or AIPAC as being anti-Semitic. Chuck Schumer said, when someone looks at a neo-Nazi rally and sees some very fine people among its company, we must call it out. when someone suggests money drives support for Israel, we must call it out. Not only is it a bit melodramatic to equate neo-Nazis to critics of Israel, it's also ironic given the fact that Schumer made this statement at AIPAC.
Байден, да, Байден не относится к левым демократам, понятно, это как раз там более новая generation. Байден вообще левоцентрист или даже центрист, он вполне себе, то есть, потому его кандидатура и вот рассматривалась и на прошлых выборах, и на этих, в качестве такой компромиссной фигуры, потому да, Байден довольно произраильский, хотя даже вот относительно недавно там тоже призывал к прекращению огня и все такое.
The largest pro-Israel lobbying group in the U.S. AIPAC itself spends roughly $3.5 million a year promoting pro-Israel special interests. And though that may not seem like a lot, the real money is what's contributed by its pool of wealthy pro-Israel donors. AIPAC functions not only as a lobbying group, but as an organization that helps donors connect with politicians. While AIPAC doesn't directly donate to political campaigns, its donors and the PACs that it helps organize do. And it's estimated that in 2018, these donors spent over $22 million in contributions and lobbying, like a lobbying group. So pro-Israel lobbying groups do literally spend money to influence politics, and this.
Лоббистские группы тратят деньги, чтобы влиять на политику. Нихуя. А мы не думали, блядь, что такое существует. Ебать. Сука.
This is not nor should be an attack on Jewish people, who may or may not support Israel, and most of whom have nothing to do with AIPAC. But maybe Schumer and those who call this anti-Semitic are acting in good faith. After all, there really are anti-Semitic tropes regarding Jewish people and money. I mean, there's even bigoted terms like shekels, a Hebrew term for currency, that's been co-opted by white nationalists to be a racist dog whistle hinting at the influence of Jewish money. Although I suppose, nobody in politics would be stupid and hateful enough to actually say,
It'll mean you sell 3 extra books, you make 3 extra shekels.
Hey, at least Chuck Schumer can...
Это какой-то мем просто, хуй знает. Заработал шекели.
Condemned this anti-Semitic statement, and House Democrats issued a resolution denouncing Eric Trump's what they didn't. Yeah, of course they didn't. Well, this is just one isolated incident. Maybe they just missed it. I'm sure there aren't any other examples of conservatives using anti-Semitic tropes like referencing the conspiracy theory that Jewish George Soros is puppeteering forced multiculturalism, the conspiracy theory that motivated the Pittsburgh synagogue shooter.
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. No, I don't know who, but I wouldn't be surprised. A lot of people say yes.
Okay, well, at least he didn't call neo-Nazis and their associates very fine people. No, yep, wait, he did do that. He definitely did do that. Well, at least he didn't imply that Jewish Americans aren't Americans. You see, Ilhan Omar has been accused of using the dual loyalty trope, of implying that Jewish people are loyal to Israel. Why has she been accused of this? Because she's criticized American pro-Israel lobbying groups, which somehow means she thinks all Jewish people are loyal to Israel. That seems like a bit of a stretch. Sometimes so stretchy, in fact, that people will claim that she accused all Jews of having dual loyalty, putting dual loyalty in quotes.
Ну, это теории заговоров классические, да. Особенно с евреями, так это вообще.
Implying that she said those words ever, despite her literally never saying those words ever. So yeah, bit of a stretch. I mean, but it's not like she implied that Jewish citizens are actually Israeli citizens. You'd have to be an incredibly stupid politician to do that. And let me guess, you're about to show me a clip of Donald Trump telling the American Republican Jewish Coalition that Netanyahu is their prime minister, implying that they're not real U.S. citizens, the very sort of dual loyalty anti-Semitism that Republicans have been, without evidence, accusing Ilhan Omar of.
But I stood with your prime minister at the White House.
There it is. And can we get a stinger of Fox News very bluntly and literally accusing Ilhan Omar of dual loyalty?
Omar and Rashida Tlaib, who you referred to, it's almost as though they think they're representing another country.
Yeah, that's the stuff. So, Trump and Fox News are a collective of racist maggots parading around in human flesh vehicles. But what's new? Trump's gonna Trump. It's not like there are examples of blatant anti-Semitism actually coming from Israel's leaders, like Netanyahu or his family. That would be completely absurd. We're gonna find out that it's actually the case. Yeah? Netanyahu's son, Yair Netanyahu, posted a meme of George Soros' head superimposed over the happy merchant image, a virulently anti-Semitic image depicting a Jewish person rubbing his hands together, usually used by white nationalist forums such as Stormfront and 4chan. The image seemed to imply that Soros was part of some kind of Jewish reptilian global conspiracy, which, I'm sorry, we're still accusing people of being reptilians? That is ridiculous, all right? Don't you know that it's the Boer people who are pulling all of the strings? Do your research, people! Anyways, Yair took the meme down after heavy criticism, but he was defended by, David Duke, cool. Well, you can't help who jumps to your defense, all right? But you can help who you have dinner with. Yair Netanyahu broke bread with Sebastian Gorka. Gorka is known for his possibly large head, and for his support for the Hungarian Guard, a neo-fascist anti-Semitic paramilitary group. Maybe Netanyahu's son is just going through that rebellious, making friends with probable Nazis phase. Unfortunately, Netanyahu himself seems rather Machiavellian. We don't need AIPAC anymore, Benjamin Netanyahu mused to one of his advisors a few months ago. We have enough support in the United States from the evangelicals. I'd happily give up on AIPAC if we didn't need to counteract J Street. Netanyahu's also given Hitler sort of mulligan on that whole Holocaust thing. In a speech for the World Zionist Congress, Netanyahu...
Спасибо большое. Это что-то свеча, да, пришло? Так, какие-то фолловеры. 200 фолловеров на Твиче. Уху-ху.
Netanyahu claimed that in 1941, the Mufti of Jerusalem was the real architect behind the Holocaust. Hitler didn't want to exterminate the Jews at the time, he wanted to expel the Jew. And Haj Amin al-Husseini went to Hitler and said, if you expel them, they'll all come here, to Palestine. According to Netanyahu, Hitler then asked, what should I do with them? And the Mufti replied, burn them. And it's important to note that the vast majority of historical scholars do not think Husseini had anything to do with Hitler's final solution, and there's been no corroboration of this dialogue between them ever taking place. This whole Hitler didn't even want to kill Jews is a pretty weird flex on Netanyahu's part, but okay. So, is this to say Netanyahu and his son are anti-Semitic? No. More realistically, he's acting in the way that politicians do, making cold, strategic calculations that promote their far-right-wing agenda, even if it means having odd bedfellows with anti-Semites like Hitler, kind of. And that means that we should be wary when critics of Israel are labeled as anti-Semites, because it's a term that has been abused or ignored depending on which side of supporting the Israeli government you land on. This is a problem not only because it silences dissent, but because anti-Semitism is a very real issue. Reducing the meaning of it to simply indicate whether you're pro or anti-Israeli policy while ignoring the actual vitriolic cases of anti-Semitism is a deeply cynical and dangerous political philosophy. As a final note about the motivation for this video, the writer of this episode wanted me to say this. I'm going to pretend it's written down here. I remember going to the family cabin with my dad and family. A neighbor once came up and knocked on our door, not knowing we were Jewish. My dad answered and listened as this neighbor went on a rant about how Jews were ruining the community. My dad was terrified. Here he was, Jewish, with 2 young children and his wife, miles and miles from any potential help. He was afraid of what this man, our neighbor, might do if he found out my dad was Jewish. I remember the times I received comments for being Jewish, high school friends, claiming Jews started most of the wars, that Jews killed Jesus, and that's why people don't like them. The idea that someone could hate me just because of my ancestry has always been a frightening, sobering reality, and having that terrible specter of hatred used as a callous political tool to silence dissent regarding Israel's policy makes me feel used, dehumanized, and angry. I realize that bearing my feelings here is pretty heavy, so to lighten the mood, I'm going to write some funny words in this script for Cody to say. Poop, butt cheek, wiener farts, turd dangle, nipples, and finally, D's nuts. Thanks everybody, I've been News. Time to Check out that comment section. I bet it's real nice down there.
Наконец-то мы это досмотрели. Окей, онлайн мой уже умер, так что поздно о нем думать.